She was framed for poisoning the Luna. The Alpha King stopped the execution with one roar. The wooden pyre smelled of rosemary and thyme, herbs. Vespera had once dried in bundles above her workshop hearth. Now someone had woven them into the kindling below her feet. A gardener's cruel joke. They'll burn a witch with her own medicine. She could see the castle's highest tower from where she stood bound, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun like watching eyes. Once, she'd dreamed of walking those upper corridors, delivering healing tinctures to the royal family. Now those same stones would witness her death. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. The courtyard of the royal pack reeked of mob justice and torch oil. Vespera's wrists bled where the iron shackles bit into skin. Her herbalist's hands that had delivered babies, set broken bones, brewed fever reducers for children, now displayed like evidence of witchcraft. 5 days had passed since Lady Soraya's guards had torn through her apothecary, scattering dried lavender and crushed valerian root across the floor while they dragged her out by her hair. Murderer! Poisoner! Burn the witch! The crowd's chanting blurred into a single roar of hatred. Above the scaffold, someone had hung a banner painted in mocking crimson letters. Here burns the slayer of our beloved Luna. The fabric snapped in the wind, and with each crack, Vespera's heart seemed to answer with a desperate, irregular beat. Any last words, Herbalist? The executioner's voice was almost kind, which somehow made it worse. He adjusted his leather gloves, preparing to light the torch that would ignite her pyre. Vespera's gaze found Lady Soraya on the marble balcony, draped in mourning black that looked obscenely expensive. The woman's lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes, a predator watching prey finally cornered. On Soraya's finger, catching the light, was a ring Vespera recognized. The late Luna's moonstone ring, the one they said was buried with her body. I only made the tea, Vespera whispered, her wolf stirring weakly inside her, suffocated by silver-laced chains. I only ever helped people. Soraya's smile widened. The executioner raised his torch. Vespera closed her eyes, inhaling smoke that hadn't yet begun to burn her, remembering the scent of chamomile, of mint, of all the innocent things she'd loved. She'd studied herbs since she was 7 years old, learned their secrets, their combinations, their uses in healing. And now those same plants would carry the flames that consumed her. I'm sorry, Mother. I should have been more careful. I should have known they'd need someone to blame. The crowd fell silent as the torch descended toward the oil-soaked kindling. In that crystalline moment before flame met wood, Vespera heard her own heartbeat, 3 rapid strikes, then a pause, then 3 more. The rhythm of terror. She opened her eyes one last time to face her death with dignity. The kindling caught. Heat licked at the hem of her rough prison dress. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Then the world shattered. A roar erupted from the royal viewing box. Not a shout, not a command, but something primal that vibrated through the cobblestones and rattled the chains on her wrists. Vespera's wolf, dormant and suppressed, suddenly screamed in recognition, clawing toward consciousness, despite the silver burning through her veins. She'd never seen King Varic up close. The Alpha King was a legend whispered in taverns. The Ice Wolf, they called him. A ruler who'd unified the northern packs through ruthless efficiency and cold calculation. She'd expected a distant figurehead who'd signed her execution warrant without a second thought. Instead, as her eyes found him vaulting over the balcony railing, she saw a force of nature given flesh. His face was all brutal angles, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from the mountain stone his castle rested on, and eyes like frozen mercury that locked onto hers with an intensity that stopped her lungs mid-breath. He didn't run down the stairs. He leaped, 30 feet through the air, and mid-descent, his body erupted into transformation. Bones cracked and reformed, skin gave way to fur the color of liquid fire, and by the time he hit the burning scaffold, he was no longer a man, but a wolf of mythological proportions. The platform groaned under his weight, wood splintering as flames scattered in every direction. Guards stumbled backward. The executioner dropped his torch. The massive wolf stood over Vespera, one enormous paw planted on either side of her body, shielding her from the flames that still licked hungrily at the platform's edges. His growl resonated through her bones, through the very earth, a sound that made alpha warriors drop their weapons and submit. Slowly, impossibly, the wolf's head turned to scan the crowd. Then his gaze lifted to the balcony, where Lady Soraya stood frozen, her victorious smile finally, beautifully, shattered into horror. The transformation reversed, not completely, but enough. The wolf's muzzle shortened, vocal cords were formed just enough for speech, creating something between man and beast that legends were built on. When King Varic spoke, his voice carried the harmonics of both forms, human authority layered over wolf dominance, and the three words that left his throat rewrote the law of the pack in a single breath. She is mine. The chains on Vespera's wrists began to glow red-hot, then simply dissolved, an alpha command so powerful it broke physical bonds. The flames consuming the platform extinguished as if a god had blown them out like candle wicks. Vespera's wolf surged forward, pressing against her consciousness with desperate, confused joy. Mate, mate, mate. But that was impossible. Alpha Kings didn't claim lowly herbalists. They especially didn't claim convicted murderers facing execution. King Varic's mercury eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that terrified her more than the pyre ever had. Absolute certainty. Without breaking eye contact, still halfway between man and wolf, he reached down with a clawed hand and severed the remaining ropes binding her to the stake. Then, with a gentleness that contradicted every legend she'd ever heard about the ice wolf, he lifted her into his arms. "My king." Lady Soraya's voice cracked across the courtyard. "That woman poisoned your—" The growl that erupted from Varic's throat silenced her mid-sentence. He turned, carrying Vespera against his chest, where she could feel the dual rhythm of his heartbeat, human steady, wolf racing, and began walking through a crowd that parted like water before a ship's prow. Vespera's fingers, acting on instinct born from years of tending the injured, found the burns on his forearms where he'd walked through flame to reach her. The flesh was already beginning to heal, but she could smell the damage, categorize it automatically. Second degree, protein coagulation will scar without treatment. "You're hurt," she whispered, her healer's mind overriding her shock. King Varic's eyes flashed down to her, and for a brief moment, something that might have been surprise crossed his features. Then his expression hardened back into that terrifying certainty. "You'll tend it," he said, not a question but a statement of absolute fact. "In my tower, where you'll remain until I understand why my wolf would rather burn than watch you die." Behind them, Lady Soraya's protest died unspoken, as the king carried his condemned prisoner past guards who now stood at attention, past nobles who'd come to watch a burning, past the banner that still hung mocking and false above the smoking remains of the pyre. The crowd's chanting had died. The only sound was the rhythm of the Alpha King's boots against stone, carrying Vespera away from her death, and toward a fate she couldn't begin to comprehend. Chapter 1. The Beast on the Scaffold. The flames caught faster than Vespera expected. One moment, the executioner's torch hovered above the kindling. The next, fire raced across oil-soaked wood with hungry efficiency. Heat slammed into her legs, and she couldn't stop the scream that tore from her throat. Not words, just animal terror as smoke filled her lungs. The crowd roared its approval. Someone threw a rotten vegetable that splattered against the scaffold post. The executioner stepped back, his duty complete, leaving her to burn slowly enough for the spectacle to satisfy the mob's bloodlust. Then the roar came. It wasn't sound, it was pressure, a shockwave that rippled through the courtyard and made the flames themselves seem to flinch. Vespera's wolf, suffocated by silver chains and fear, suddenly lurched awake with a violence that made her gasp. Every instinct screamed a single word: Alpha. King Varic cleared the balcony railing in a single leap. 30 feet of empty air yawned beneath him, and halfway through the fall his body simply exploded into transformation. Bones restructured with audible cracks, muscle and sinew reformed, and by the time gravity brought him down onto the burning platform, the man was gone. The wolf that landed was the size of a warhorse. His fur blazed copper red in the firelight, almost molten, and when his massive paws struck the wood, the entire scaffold groaned and tilted. Burning planks scattered. Guards stumbled backward, crying out in shock. The executioner's torch fell from nerveless fingers. The beast stood directly over Vespera, his body a canopy of fur and muscle that blocked the flames spreading beneath them. His head swung toward the nearest guard, a man who'd been raising a spear, and the growl that erupted from his throat made the guard drop his weapon and fall to his knees, neck bared in submission. Another guard tried to approach from the left. The wolf's jaws snapped in his direction, not biting, just promising, and the man scrambled backward so fast he tripped over his own feet. The executioner, braver or more foolish than the rest, took a single step toward the pyre. "My king," the sentence was. The wolf's lips peeled back from fangs as long as daggers. The snarl that followed wasn't a warning. It was a promise of evisceration. The executioner's face went white and he backed away, hands raised in surrender. Vespera couldn't breathe. The silver chain still bound her wrists, still burned through her veins, but her wolf was throwing itself against her consciousness with desperate, confused recognition. The massive beast above her lowered his head, and for one terrifying moment, those mercury eyes, still intelligent, still him, locked onto hers. The transformation reversed partially. The wolf's muzzle shortened, bones cracking back into something that could form human speech, creating a hybrid form that belonged in nightmares. When King Varic spoke, his voice carried both man and beast, a harmonic that made every wolf in the courtyard, guard, noble, and prisoner alike, freeze in primal submission. "She is mine." The command detonated through the space like a physical force. Vespera's chains glowed red, then white, then shattered into fragments that rained down like broken stars. The flames consuming the platform simply died, extinguished by pure alpha will, as if fire itself dared not disobey. The hybrid form reached down with clawed hands and severed the ropes binding her to the stake. Then, with impossible gentleness, King Varic gathered her into his arms. Still half wolf, still terrifying, still somehow careful not to pierce her skin with his claws, and turned to face the crowd. No one moved. No one dared. He carried her down from the smoking ruins of her execution, and the sea of people parted in absolute silence. Chapter 2. Sanctuary in the Tower. Vespera woke to silk against her skin, a sensation so foreign after 5 days of dungeon stone that for a moment she thought she'd died and some merciful god had granted her peace. Then pain flared in her wrists where the shackles had bitten deep, and consciousness returned in a rush of confused memory. Fire, roaring, mercury eyes, the impossible words, "She is mine." The bed beneath her was enormous, easily large enough for 3 people, draped in furs that smelled of pine and something wilder. Predator musk. Alpha. The room around her stretched upward into shadows, all dark wood and iron fixtures, with narrow windows that revealed nothing but night sky and distant stars. A tower room. The highest point of the castle. Movement drew her attention to the chair beside the bed. King Varic sat slouched in exhaustion, still wearing the torn remains of the clothes he'd been dressed in before the transformation. His forearms rested on his knees, and even in the dim candlelight, Vespera could see the angry red burns that striped his skin from wrist to elbow. 2nd degree at minimum. The flesh was already trying to heal with alpha efficiency, but the damage had been severe. He'd walked through fire, landed on burning wood, held position in the flames long enough to shield her completely. Her healer's instincts overrode everything else. Vespera's hand moved to her pocket. Miraculously, they hadn't taken her leather pouch, the one she kept emergency supplies in, and her fingers found the small tin of burn salve she'd prepared 2 weeks ago for a blacksmith's daughter. Comfrey root, calendula, beeswax, and a touch of yarrow for the pain. "You're hurt," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. Varic's head lifted. Those mercury eyes found hers, and for a moment something dangerous flickered in their depths. "You should rest. Your arms won't heal properly without treatment. The burns will scar, possibly limit mobility in your right wrist." She was already moving, sliding from the bed before her legs had fully committed to holding her weight. She stumbled, and his hand shot out to steady her, the burned hand, because of course it was. He hissed at the contact, but didn't pull away. Vespera guided him back into the chair with the quiet authority that came from years of treating patients who thought they knew better than their healer. "Sit. Don't move." Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. You're giving orders to a king. I'm treating a patient. She unscrewed the tin, the familiar scent of herbs grounding her spinning thoughts. There's a difference. She knelt beside the chair and took his right arm gently, assessing the damage with practiced efficiency. The burns followed the pattern of his transformation, where human skin had met flame before fur could fully protect it. She began applying the salve with careful fingers, and Varic's muscles tensed beneath her touch. Why did you save me? The question escaped before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer, just watched her work with an intensity that made her hands want to tremble. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of admission. I didn't. Vespera's hands stilled. I didn't save you out of kindness, Herbalist. I didn't save you because I believed in your innocence. His free hand curled into a fist. My wolf saw you standing in those flames and refused to let you die. It wasn't a choice. It was a compulsion so violent that if I hadn't intervened, my own beast would have torn its way out of my skin and murdered every person in that courtyard. She looked up, meeting those storm-colored eyes. So no, Varic continued, something almost like anger threading through his words. I didn't save you. My wolf claimed you, and now I need to understand why. Chapter 3. The Deceiver's Visit. The knock came 3 hours past dawn, sharp and insistent. Vespera had been dozing in the chair beside the window, exhausted from a sleepless night spent replaying the impossible events of her execution. At the sound, Varic's eyes snapped open with the instant alertness of a predator, his hand moving unconsciously to where a weapon would normally rest. My king. The guard's voice filtered through the heavy oak door. Lady Soraya demands an audience. She says it's urgent regarding the prisoner. Varic's jaw tightened. He rose from where he'd been sitting at his desk, reviewing documents he'd barely glanced at. Tell her I'm occupied. She insists, Your Majesty. She's brought members of the council with her. A muscle ticked in Varic's cheek. He turned to Vespera, and something unreadable passed through his expression. The alcove, behind the tapestry, now. Vespera didn't argue. She'd learned in her years as a lowly herbalist that survival often meant making herself invisible when powerful people conducted their business. She slipped behind the massive tapestry depicting some ancient battle, finding a narrow space where the tower's curved wall created a natural hiding spot. Through a gap in the fabric, she had a clear view of the room. Varic opened the door. Lady Soraya swept in like a winter storm, all flowing black silk and calculated grief. Her hair was artfully arranged, her face painted with just enough pallor to suggest sleepless nights of mourning. Behind her, 2 council members followed, Lord Garrett and Elder Miriam, both looking uncomfortable with the early hour. My king, Soraya breathed, and her voice carried the perfect tremor of concern. Forgive the intrusion, but I must speak with you about what happened yesterday. About that woman. Her name is Vespera. Varic's tone could have frozen water. Yes, the herbalist. Soraya moved closer, her hands clasped before her in a gesture of supplication. Varic, I know you believe you acted righteously, but I fear you've been deceived. That woman, she's dangerous. She's accused of poisoning the Luna. She hasn't been proven guilty. Because she's clever. Soraya's voice rose with manufactured passion. Don't you see? She's a witch, Varic. She must have clouded your mind, made you believe she was something she's not. The Luna was my dearest friend, and that creature murdered her with poisoned tea. From her hiding place, Vespera watched Soraya's performance with growing unease. The woman was masterful, every gesture calculated, every word delivered with perfect emotional weight. If Vespera hadn't known the truth, she might have believed her herself. My wolf knows its own mind, Varic said, voice dangerously quiet. Does it? Or did she cast some spell when you looked at her? Omegas have been known to. Soraya reached out, placing her hand on Varic's arm in a gesture that seemed comforting but held an edge of possession. That's when Vespera saw it. The ring on Soraya's right hand caught the morning light streaming through the tower window. A moonstone set in silver, carved with intricate patterns that Vespera recognized immediately. She'd seen that ring 100 times on the late Luna's hand when delivering monthly tinctures to the royal chambers. The Luna had loved that ring, called it her mother's legacy, said she'd be buried wearing it when her time came. Vespera's breath caught. The Luna had been buried 3 weeks ago with full ceremonial honors. She'd attended the funeral herself, standing at the back with the other common folk, watching as they lowered the casket into the ground. That ring should be 6 feet under the earth. The council agrees, Lord Garrett added, stepping forward. The woman should be returned to custody until a proper trial can be conducted. Your actions yesterday, while dramatic, violated centuries of legal precedent. Soraya's fingers tightened on Varic's arm, and the moonstone ring glinted like an accusation. Please, Varic, for the memory of your beloved Luna, let justice be served. Chapter 4. The Poisoned Chalice. Soraya and the council members left an hour later, their protests dismissed with the kind of cold finality that reminded everyone why Varic was called the Ice Wolf. The moment the door closed, Vespera emerged from behind the tapestry, her mind still fixed on the moonstone ring that had no business being on a living woman's hand. Varic turned to face her, and something in his expression had shifted. The reluctant captor was gone, replaced by something sharper, calculating. You saw it too? It wasn't a question. The ring, the Luna's ring, it should be buried with her. Yes. He moved to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room, producing an iron key from his pocket. Which means either Soraya robbed a grave, or the Luna never wore it to her burial. He opened the cabinet and withdrew something wrapped in dark velvet. I need you to look at something. The bundle unfolded to reveal a delicate porcelain cup, its rim still stained with dried residue. Even from 3 feet away, Vespera could smell the ghost of chamomile and honey, the base of the tea she'd prepared that final morning. But underneath it, something else, something that made her wolf stir uneasily. This is what killed her, Varic said, setting the cup on the desk between them. The physicians found nothing, said it was her heart, that she'd simply stopped breathing. But I know poison when I see death by poison. Vespera approached slowly, her healer's instincts overriding her fear of being so close to evidence of her alleged crime. She'd brewed that tea with her own hands, pure chamomile, raw honey, a touch of lavender for the Luna's anxiety. Nothing that could harm. Nothing that should have killed. She lifted the cup, bringing it close to her face. The scent hit her in layers. First the chamomile, still faintly sweet, then the honey, crystallized now. And beneath it all, so subtle she would have missed it 5 days ago, a bitter alkaloid signature that made her stomach clench. But something was different. Her sense of smell had always been keen, a herbalist's gift, but now it was almost overwhelming. She could parse individual compounds, identify molecular structures by scent alone. The nearness of the alpha had enhanced her omega senses, sharpened them to impossible precision. Nightshade, she whispered. But not common nightshade. This is Atropa belladonna nobilis, the aristocrat's strain. Varic's eyes narrowed. Meaning? Meaning it doesn't grow in the common woods where I gather herbs. It only grows in private gardens, cultivated specifically by the nobility. The alkaloid concentration is 3 times higher than wild nightshade, enough to stop a heart in minutes if prepared correctly. Her hands trembled as she set the cup down. Someone added this after the tea left my workshop. They had to. I never use nightshade in teas, never, and I certainly don't have access to the noble strain. She looked up at Varic, and the pieces began to fall into horrible alignment. Whoever did this had access to aristocratic gardens. They had knowledge of advanced poisoncraft, and they had the ability to intercept the tea between my shop and the Luna's chambers. Soraya was the Luna's closest companion, Varic said quietly. She personally oversaw all food and drink delivered to the royal chambers. The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the castle waking to morning routines. Vespera's mind raced through everything she knew about nightshade cultivation, about the private gardens maintained by high-ranking pack members, about who would have both motive and means. I need to see the gardens, she said finally. If someone harvested aristocrats' nightshade recently, there will be evidence. The plant takes years to cultivate properly. They wouldn't destroy the source. Chapter 5. A War of Whispers. Vespera couldn't sleep. The tower room felt like a gilded cage, and her mind wouldn't stop cataloging everything she knew about nightshade, cultivation periods, harvest seasons, preparation methods. If she could understand exactly how the poison was made, she might be able to trace it back to its source. But her knowledge had gaps, and those gaps could mean the difference between proving her innocence and returning to the pyre. The castle library was 7 floors down. She'd seen it once, years ago, when delivering a sleeping draught to the former court physician. If the medical texts were still shelved where she remembered, she could find what she needed. Varic had left an hour ago to meet with his generals, trusting, or perhaps testing, whether she'd stay put. Vespera waited until his footsteps faded completely, then slipped out the door. The corridors were dimly lit by torches, casting dancing shadows that helped her avoid the occasional guard. She kept to the servants' passages, the narrow walkways that the nobility pretended didn't exist, and made it to the library without incident. The room was vast and empty, shelves stretching to vaulted ceilings. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, providing just enough illumination to read by. Vespera found the medical section and pulled down a thick volume on toxic botanicals, flipping through pages until she found the entry on Atropa belladonna nobilis. Requires acidic soil, partial shade, minimum 5 years to reach maturity, she murmured, tracing the text with her finger. Berry harvest in late summer, root harvest in, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Multiple pairs. Guards on patrol. Vespera's heart lurched. She shouldn't be here. If they found her wandering the castle freely, they'd drag her back to the dungeons, Alpha King's claim or not. She moved to hide behind the far shelves, but the door was already opening. Then a hand clamped over her mouth and an arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her backward into the shadows between 2 towering bookcases. She knew the scent before she saw him. Pine and winter frost, and something uniquely, impossibly him. Varic. He pressed her against the shelf, his body a wall of heat and muscle, one hand still covering her mouth, while the other braced beside her head. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his mercury eyes, close enough to feel his breath against her skin. "Don't move." His whisper barely qualified as sound. Through the gap between books, Vespera watched 2 guards pass the library entrance, their conversation drifting in about increased patrols and the prisoner situation. They moved on without entering, but Varic didn't pull away. If anything, he pressed closer, as though the danger had triggered some protective instinct he couldn't quite control. His hand slowly lowered from her mouth. Neither of them spoke. Vespera became acutely aware of everywhere their bodies touched. His chest against hers, his thigh pressed between her legs for balance, his hand now resting against the shelf beside her head, caging her in. Her wolf surged forward with a want so intense it bordered on pain, and from the way Varic's pupils dilated, she knew he could scent it. "You were supposed to stay in the tower." His voice had gone rough, almost guttural. "I needed information about the poison." "You could have asked." "You were with your generals. I didn't want to wait." His free hand moved, seemingly without his permission, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was achingly gentle, completely at odds with the predatory tension in his frame. "Do you have any idea what they'd do if they found you wandering free? What Soraya would claim you were doing?" "I was careful." "Careful." He laughed, a dark sound that had nothing to do with humor. "You're the most wanted woman in this castle, accused of regicide, and you're sneaking through corridors like you're still just a herbalist making house calls. I'm trying to prove my innocence." "I know." His thumb traced along her jawline and Vespera forgot how to breathe. "I know, and it's making everything infinitely more complicated." "Why?" The word hung between them, charged with more than one question. Varic's gaze dropped to her lips, and for one suspended moment, Vespera thought he might kiss her. Wanted him to. His wolf was right there beneath his skin. She could feel it, pressing against her own with a claiming instinct that should have terrified her, but instead felt like coming home. "Because," he said finally, his voice barely more than a growl, "I'm starting to care more about keeping you alive than I do about the politics, and that's dangerous." Chapter 6. The Garden of Night. The royal gardens were forbidden after sunset, locked behind iron gates that bore the Alpha King's seal. Varic produced the key without ceremony, and the lock opened with a whisper of well-oiled mechanisms. Beyond the gates, manicured pathways wound through beds of moonflowers and night-blooming jasmine, their perfume almost obscenely sweet in the darkness. "Where would she keep them?" Varic asked, his voice low despite the garden's emptiness. Vespera closed her eyes, letting her enhanced senses guide her. The proximity to the Alpha had sharpened everything. She could smell individual plants, distinguish between similar species by the subtle differences in their aromatic compounds. There, beneath the jasmine and roses, something bitter. Alkaloid, dangerous. East corner, near the wall. She opened her eyes and started walking, following the scent like a thread through a labyrinth. They found the patch tucked behind a decorative hedge, deliberately hidden from the main pathways. The nightshade plants were magnificent specimens, their dark berries gleaming like polished obsidian in the moonlight. But several stems had been cut recently, the wounds still weeping sap, and the soil around the base of the plants showed signs of root harvesting. "Someone took cuttings," Vespera said, kneeling to examine the damage, and dug up part of the root system, within the last month, judging by the healing pattern. She touched one of the cut stems and her fingers came away sticky with residue. "This is definitely the aristocrat strain. The concentration is—" A sound interrupted her. Footsteps, hurried and furtive, coming from deeper in the garden. Then the distinct smell of lamp oil. Varic's hand moved to the knife at his belt. He motioned for Vespera to stay low, then moved with predatory silence toward the source of the noise. She followed despite his gesture, unwilling to be left behind when they were this close to proof. They found him in a small clearing surrounded by herb beds. A thin man in gardener's clothes, pouring oil from a jug onto a pile of uprooted nightshade plants. His hands shook as he worked, splashing more oil on his boots than the plants. A flint striker sat ready on the ground beside him. "I'd reconsider that," Varic said, stepping into the clearing. The gardener spun, his face draining of color as he recognized the king. The oil jug fell from his hands, spilling its contents across the flagstones. "Your Majesty, I was just—" "Destroying evidence?" Varic's voice carried the edge of his wolf, making the gardener's knees buckle. "Burning plants that matched the poison used to kill my Luna?" "Please, I didn't know. She said they were just weeds," she said. The man's words tumbled over each other in panic. "Who said?" Vespera stepped forward, her healer's instinct recognizing the signs of genuine terror. "Who ordered you to destroy these plants?" The gardener's eyes darted between them, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. "Lady Soraya. She came to me this afternoon, said these plants had become infested, needed to be burned tonight before they contaminated the rest of the garden." He gestured desperately at the uprooted nightshade. "I'm just following orders. I swear on the moon, I didn't know they were connected to the Luna's death." Varic moved faster than human eyes could track, seizing the gardener by his collar and lifting him off his feet. "How long have you been cultivating these plants for Lady Soraya?" 5 years. Maybe 6. The man's voice cracked. "She said she needed them for her complexion, said the berries made a tonic for the skin. I thought it was just vanity." 5 years, Vespera repeated, the timeline clicking into place. "She's been planning this for 5 years. Chapter 7, The Alpha's Rage. They locked the gardener in the tower's holding cell, 3 floors below Varic's private chambers. 2 guards stood watch outside, handpicked by the king himself, men whose loyalty had been tested in war. The gardener would testify before the council at dawn, would describe in detail how Lady Soraya had cultivated poison for half a decade, how she'd ordered the evidence destroyed the moment suspicion began to circle back toward her. Vespera should have felt relief. Instead, dread coiled in her stomach like a living thing. She paced Varic's chamber while he met with his advisors, preparing the formal accusations that would bring Soraya before the council. Through the window, she watched the sky slowly lighten from black to deep blue, counting down the hours until the gardener's testimony would finally clear her name. The scream came just before dawn. Vespera's wolf surged forward at the sound of running feet, shouted orders, the metallic scent of death drifting up through the tower's ventilation shafts. She was at the door before Varic burst through it, his face carved from stone and fury. "He's dead." The words came out flat, emotionless, but his eyes blazed with barely contained rage. "The gardener. Poison. Same nightshade compound that killed the Luna." The room tilted. "That's impossible. He was guarded. How could—" "I don't know." Varic's hands clenched into fists. "But Soraya is already spinning it. She's convinced half the council that you used shadow magic to reach through the walls and poison him. that you're a dark practitioner who can kill from a distance. That's insane. I've been locked in this room all night. I know that, but they're frightened, Vespera. A man died in a secured cell with 2 guards outside his door. No one entered, no one left. The only food he ate was from the castle kitchens, already tested for poison. His voice dropped. They want an explanation, and Soraya's giving them one that doesn't implicate her. The knock came minutes later. Heavy. Official. Lord Garrett's voice filtered through the oak. Your Majesty, the council has convened an emergency session. They're demanding the prisoner be surrendered to proper custody pending a full investigation into the gardener's death. Varic's growl made the door rattle in its frame. Tell the council, I'll be there shortly. With respect, Your Majesty, they're demanding she be transferred now. They've sent a detachment of guards to... The door flew open before Garrett could finish. Varic stood in the threshold, and something in his bearing made the Lord Counselor take an involuntary step backward. Behind him, 6 guards stood at attention, their hands on their weapons but their eyes carefully averted from the Alpha King's face. The council, Varic said with deadly calm, can demand all they like. She stays here. My king, please be reasonable. Elder Miriam appeared behind the guards, her expression pained. We're not suggesting execution, just proper containment until we understand how she killed the gardener. If she truly has powers we don't comprehend. She was in my sight all night. The lie came smoothly, and Vespera's breath caught. Every moment, she didn't leave this room, didn't practice any magic, didn't do anything except sleep. Soraya's voice cut through the gathering crowd like a blade. She pushed through the guards, her face a masterwork of concerned grief. Then perhaps, Your Majesty, she's clouded your perception as well. Perhaps you only think you watched her all night, when in reality she was. Careful. The word came out as a growl. You're suggesting an Alpha King can be so easily manipulated? I'm suggesting, Soraya said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic murmur that carried perfectly to everyone present, that fated mates have been known to make even the strongest wolves irrational. And if she truly is your mate, well, perhaps your judgment is compromised. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. If Varic continued to protect Vespera against the council's will, he'd be seen as a lovesick fool, unfit to rule. Chapter 8. The Blood Rite. The council chamber fell silent when Varic spoke the old words. I invoke the Blood Rite of truth. Even Soraya's calculated composure cracked for a moment. The Blood Rite was ancient law, predating the unified pacts, rooted in the primal traditions of their wolf ancestors. It demanded trial by combat or ordeal, with the accused's champion, in this case the king himself, staking his life on her innocence. If he won, she was absolved. If he lost, they both died. Elder Miriam's face paled. Your Majesty, the Blood Rite hasn't been invoked in 3 generations. It's barbaric, unnecessary. It's law. Varic's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, written in the founding texts of this pack. Unless the council wishes to declare those texts invalid? No one dared answer. To invalidate the founding laws would invalidate the very structure of pack hierarchy, including the council's own authority. Lord Garrett cleared his throat. If the Blood Rite is invoked, we must follow protocol. The pre-trial ceremony, the ritual wine, the public declaration. Arrange it, Varic said. Tonight, in the Great Hall. Soraya's smile never wavered, but Vespera caught the flash of panic in her eyes. The Blood Rite changed everything. If Varic fought and won, no one could question Vespera's innocence without challenging the sacred laws themselves. Soraya would lose not just her vendetta, but potentially her position, her influence, everything. A desperate woman with everything to lose was the most dangerous creature in any kingdom. The Great Hall filled quickly, nobles and common pack members alike crowding in to witness the ancient ritual. Vespera stood beside Varic on the raised platform, acutely aware of every eye on her, every whispered accusation that rippled through the crowd. The ceremonial wine sat on a table between them. 2 goblets, one for the king, one for the accused, to be drunk before the trial commenced. The ritual master began the invocation, speaking words in the old tongue that Vespera barely understood. Something about blood and truth, about the moon's judgment and the price of false claims. Soraya stood in the front row, her face a mask of pious concern, her hands folded demurely before her, but Vespera saw her lips move, saw the subtle gesture she made to the servant who'd poured the wine. Recognition hit like a physical blow. She knew that servant had treated his daughter for croup 2 months ago. He worked in Soraya's household. The ritual master finished his invocation. Varic reached for his goblet, and everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The scent hit Vespera's enhanced senses like a hammer, acrid, bitter, the unmistakable alkaloid signature of Nightshade mixed with something else. Hemlock. A combination that would stop even an alpha's heart within minutes, make it look like the stress of the ritual had simply been too much. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Her body moved on pure instinct. Vespera lunged forward and struck the goblet from Varic's hand just as it touched his lips. The cup flew across the platform, its contents splashing across the stone floor. Where the wine landed, the stone began to smoke and discolor, the poison so concentrated it actually etched the rock. The hall erupted into chaos. Guards drew weapons. Council members shouted over each other. But Vespera's eyes found Soraya, and in that moment, the other woman's mask finally, completely shattered. Raw hatred blazed in Soraya's face, quickly replaced by manufactured shock. She's trying to kill the king. She knocked the ceremonial wine from his hand. It's sacrilege. Guards, seize her. But Varic was staring at the smoking stone, at the wine that had been meant for his throat. His hand shot out and grabbed Vespera's wrist, pulling her behind him as his wolf surged so close to the surface his eyes blazed pure silver. Everyone, stop. The command detonated through the space with alpha force, freezing every person mid-motion. He knelt, touched the spilled wine with one finger and brought it to his nose. His face went absolutely cold. Nightshade and hemlock, enough to kill 3 alphas. He stood slowly, his gaze finding the servant who'd poured the wine. Who gave you the bottle? The servant's face drained of color. His eyes darted to Soraya, and that single glance was more damning than any confession. Chapter 9. The True Queen. Varic moved like death itself. One moment he stood beside Vespera, the next he'd crossed the distance to Soraya in a blur of preternatural speed. His hand closed around her throat, not squeezing, just holding her in place with the promise of violence so immediate that even the guards hesitated to intervene. Explain. The word came out more wolf than man. Explain why wine poured by your personal servant contains the same poison that killed my Luna. Soraya clawed at his wrist, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into genuine terror. I didn't. You can't prove. The wine is smoking on the floor. Your servant's already confessing with his eyes. Varic's grip tightened fractionally. Your gardener cultivated poison for you for 6 years. The Luna's ring sits on your finger when it should be buried with her body. And now you've tried to murder me in front of my entire court. His voice dropped to something that barely qualified as sound. Give me one reason I shouldn't rip your throat out right now. Because she was weak. The words exploded from Soraya in a rush of desperate fury. Your precious Luna was weak, Varic. She couldn't give you an heir, couldn't hold the respect of the council, couldn't even keep you in her bed. She was dying anyway, slowly, pathetically. I just hastened the inevitable. The great hall went deathly silent. Even the servants stopped breathing. You poisoned her, Varic said, each word precise as a blade, because you wanted to be Luna. I would have been perfect. Soraya's composure shattered completely, words spilling out in a torrent. I'm strong, I'm fertile, I have the bloodline and the political connections. Everything she lacked, but you never looked at me, never saw what I could offer. So I removed the obstacle and I framed that pathetic herbalist, and it should have worked. Her wild eyes found Vespera. It would have worked if your wolf hadn't claimed that worthless Omega. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Varic released Soraya's throat, letting her stumble backward. His voice, when he spoke, carried the formal cadence of royal judgment. Lady Soraya Velmont, you are guilty of regicide, attempted regicide, conspiracy to murder, and treason against the crown. He turned to the guards. Take her to the border. Exile. If she sets foot in this kingdom again, her life is forfeit. Soraya's scream as the guards seized her echoed through the hall, but Varic had already dismissed her from his attention. He turned, and his eyes found Vespera standing alone on the platform, still trembling from adrenaline, still processing that she'd just saved the Alpha King's life. He crossed the distance between them and did something that would be spoken of in pack legend for generations. King Varic, the Ice Wolf, the Alpha who'd unified the northern territories through blood and ruthless efficiency, knelt before a lowly herbalist. The great hall erupted in gasps and whispers, but he ignored them all. His hand reached for hers, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "You saved my life. You proved your innocence through courage and knowledge when I couldn't protect you through law alone." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her scarred herbalist's knuckles. "You are no prisoner. You are no accused murderer." His eyes blazed as his wolf surged forward, speaking through him with ancient authority. "You are mine, my fated mate, my savior, and if this court will accept it, my Luna." Vespera's breath caught. Around them, the nobles began to kneel, first the ones closest, then spreading like a wave through the crowd. Even the council members bent their knees, unable to deny the Alpha's claim after everything they'd witnessed. "I'm just a herbalist," Vespera whispered, meant only for Varic's ears. His smile was fierce and possessive and completely genuine. "You're my queen. There's nothing just about you." He rose, pulling her with him, and turned to face the assembled court with Vespera's hand held firmly in his. "Behold your Luna, the woman who saw truth when we were all blind, the healer who saved her king." His voice carried the resonance of both man and wolf, a declaration that would bind them before pack law and ancient tradition. "She is mine, and I am hers, and any who challenge this will answer to me." No one dared speak. No one dared move. And in the silence, Vespera finally allowed herself to believe she might actually survive this.